Welcome. I'm Lisa Adkins, President CEO of Bluegrass Community Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us for an evening with Charles Blow. At Bluegrass Community Foundation, our mission is to create more generous, vibrant, engaged, and informed communities across Central and Appalachia, Kentucky. We do this in two key ways. One, by serving as a hub for strategic giving, helping individuals, families, and companies establish charitable funds and permanent endowments, give to nonprofits, and build charitable legacies with the greatest meaning and impact. And two, by convening, collaborating, and leading on critical community issues, including the vital need for trusted local news and information. Tonight, I'm excited to announce a new Bluegrass Community Foundation initiative, Press Forward Bluegrass. We are thrilled that Charles Blow is here to help us publicly launch it. We began the planning for Press Forward Bluegrass 1 year ago and have been working quietly since to build out the effort. We know that like sidewalks and libraries, reliable local news is essential to healthy communities. It's foundational civic infrastructure. Our Press Forward Bluegrass chapter is part of a new national effort to create support for and invest in local news and information. We are incredibly fortunate to have received a competitive 4-year, $1 million investment from our longtime partners at the Knight Foundation in Miami, Florida, to supercharge our initiative, which currently serves our core 16-county service area across Central and Appalachia, Kentucky. Shortly, you'll hear from Melissa Newman, who will set the context for tonight's conversation with Charles and share more about Press Forward. Melissa started with us as a consulting strategy advisor and became our first-time, full-time executive director on November 1. Melissa is an accomplished leader, bringing deep expertise as a journalist, a professor of journalism, a nonprofit administrator, and a certified fundraising professional, who is also a grant writer extraordinaire. We are so lucky to have her aboard. Now, can anyone tell me what this is? Anyone? Did anyone grow up with one of these objects on their kitchen table? You gotta shout it out if you know. Newspaper holder, who said that? Stand up and wave. Find me afterwards. I have a $25 Bluegrass Community Foundation charitable giving card for you. And you can't quite make it out, but it literally says wife's side on the crappy back, which doesn't work at all. But what I'm gonna tell you is this is a vintage, fully aluminum tabletop newspaper stand. And an identical one, and I do mean identical, was a centerpiece of our kitchen table in my childhood home. It is ingrained in my earliest memories. I loved reading the morning paper while eating my Lucky Charms using this stand. My mom is 87, and though the rooster image has worn away with use and time, it remains on her breakfast bar today. So why the rooster motif? I assume there were many, like my dad, who kept dairy farmers' hours his entire life, rising daily before the crack of dawn, weekends were no exception, to collect the morning paper from our driveway. And daily, while eating breakfast, he read the Kansas City Times, hands-free, from our rooster stand. Around 5 p.m., the Kansas City Star would be delivered nightly. And while it was not read at the table during dinner, the network television news, one of 3 available broadcast channels, was always on, softly in the background, in case something was happening that warranted our attention. Everybody we knew subscribed to the paper and watched the nightly news. While not everyone agreed with every editorial, story, or article, our community enjoyed trusted sources of daily information that bound us together. 20 years ago, no one in this room was on Facebook or Twitter because neither publicly existed until later in 2006. You certainly were not on Instagram or TikTok, which launched in 2010 and 2017 respectively. Today, we all know we have a fractured news and information ecosystem. Social media isn't the only reason, but it is a strong contributor. So what do? In an era of media consolidation and digital disruption, we believe supporting local news and information in all its many forms, nonprofit and for-profit, is more critical than ever. Press Forward is our avenue to strengthen local news, and we invite you to join us in this effort. In addition to Knight Foundation, tonight is made possible by the generosity of the MacArthur Foundation and Press Forward National, and the incredible work and support of the Community Foundation staff and board of directors. Please join me in thanking them. It is now my pleasure to introduce Melissa Newman, Executive Director of Press Forward Bluegrass, to tell you more. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Lisa, for the amazing work that you do at Bluegrass Community Foundation and for believing in local news and breathing life into Press Forward Bluegrass. And thank you for your leadership. Thank you to all of you for being here today, showing up for a conversation about local news and reliable information about community is not passive. It's an act of care. It's an act of belief that our communities matter enough to pay attention. Over the past year, as Lisa said, our work at Press Forward Bluegrass has been quiet, not flashy, not loud, and very much by design. Because real change happens at the speed of trust. And trust grows slowly through conversations, through relationships, and through work that most people never see. Now it's time for action. Since I assumed my role full-time in November, we have secured $100,000 to support news media and civic engagement internships. We negotiated a 3-year Grow Our Own Journalists pilot with Report for America, a $180,000 investment grounded in one simple belief. The future of journalism doesn't have to be imported. It can be cultivated right here at home. And we received $125,000 in funding to move policy work forward, because we know how strong local news doesn't just need passion, it needs infrastructure. We've developed 11 funding proposals totaling more than $1 million, with nearly half of that already awarded. 8 newsrooms, both for-profit and nonprofit, stepped into philanthropy for the very first time. This is not a small shift. This is a culture change. And quietly, alongside all of this, we've been building something deeper. A deep learning journalism curriculum designed to help community members tell their stories of their own places. Because place-based journalism means the people who live the story get to tell the story. And let me say this clearly. Without reliable local news and information, every effort to strengthen community is built on shaky ground. Absolutely nothing works the way that it should. Because as parents, when you don't know what's happening in your local schools, you lose the ability to advocate for your children before decisions are ever made. When you don't understand the project, policies, or the investments shaping your community, opportunity feels like something that happens to you instead of something that's happening with you. This matters. And when no one is covering local government or asking the hard questions, those in power, often elected officials, don't feel the need to explain themselves to the very people who put them in office. That is what disappears when local news disappears. Not just headlines, connection. Not just information, agency, your belief that you can do something about an issue. Not just stories, but trust. And that is why this work, this investment in people, in place, in truth, matters so much. This is everything. Tonight, I am honored to introduce someone who has helped reimagine what rebuilding local journalism can look like across this country. Jason Blakeney, Director of Core and Newsroom Excellence for Report for America, often reminds us that the future of local journalism depends on innovation rooted in community trust. Jason was the first person I pitched the idea for Grow Our Own Community Journalists pilot project last spring during a meeting in Minneapolis. Jason brings decades of newsroom leadership to this work, and in the spirit of experimentation and putting our heads together and bearing down and just simply figuring out what will work, Press Forward Bluegrass and Report for America are launching a new pilot to rethink how communities recruit, train, and retain the next generation of local reporters. Report for America is the expert in recruiting, placing and mentoring journalists across the country. They have positioned more than 750 reporters in more than 450 local newsrooms nationwide, helping those newsrooms also raise $60 million in local fundraising, while providing $24 million in direct salary support. This pilot project and partnership between Report for America and Press Forward Bluegrass is rooted in the hypothesis that we can teach journalism, but we cannot teach place-based embeddedness. We cannot teach trusted voices that already exist in our communities. We know that local news demands local voices. We are so grateful that Report for America and the 3 local newsrooms in the pilot that will launch March 1st, Media Lex, Civic Lex, and the Woodford Sun, are taking this journey with us, a journey that is a step toward informing the field and making our newsrooms more sustainable through pulling from our own local talent. Please join me in welcoming Jason Blakeney.
Thank you, everyone, for having me here tonight. I really appreciate it. The first thing that anyone ever said to me that made me realize that being a journalist was my calling was in college. And I had a professor, I was on the road to be a teacher, and I took a journalism teaching course. And my professor, George Daniels at the University of Alabama, said, I know you want to be a teacher, but I read your writing and you're talented. And think of all the lives you could impact, not just children, but their parents and those children if you became a journalist. And so I was able to do that. And over the last 20 years, which is kind of crazy to say, I've had the luxury of living in some pretty great places, including Kentucky. I spent 2 years in Kentucky at the Louisville Courier-Journal. Did I say that right? Louisville? I know that's a hot button issue around here. But in those 2 years, I learned a lot about this community. And the number one thing that I learned about people in Kentucky is that when they put their mind to something, that's what's going to happen. And when Melissa came to us and said, we'd really like to try to teach trusted community members how to be journalists, she clearly wasn't going to take no for an answer, and that's why I'm here tonight. So we're excited to not only help train these journalists, but also help train these newsrooms in how to sustain these positions once we are out of the picture, right? Because we're going to leave that partnership in 3 years with these newsrooms, but those newsrooms are going to continue on, and so are the people in those newsrooms. And so teaching sustainability and teaching the ability to not only be someone who can do the job, but also help bring in the funding to do the job is really important to us. So I hope that all of you will leave tonight with the impression that Press Forward Bluegrass is not only starting today, but it's going to continue for the years to come, and that everyone can get behind supporting this organization. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your time, and have a great night.
Thank you, Jason. So first, the first three newsrooms, and the second step, although Jason doesn't know it yet, is the rest of Kentucky. So we are in line to make this happen. So before we get started with the main interview with Charles Blow, we want to show a 10-minute segment of one of the documentary pieces, and I hope that you enjoy, and we will be right back to start our interview.
My love of local news began here in Arcadia, Louisiana, 8 miles east of my hometown, where my 4-H club visited the offices of the Bienville Democrat, the small newspaper that served my home parish.
This is where it used to be.
My mother has always been a voracious reader and news consumer, and she was a subscriber to the Democrat. Hi, how are you? We think that this is where the Democrat used to be.
It did.
It was here. So the printing press would have been back here somewhere, but it was this. And that newspaper is still publishing. So this is the Bienville Democrat. But some rural and even some urban communities haven't been as fortunate, with many losing their news sources. I came back home to understand the impacts of those losses and innovative journalists addressing the problem. We've just arrived in Jonesboro, which is the center of Jackson Parish. It is a neighboring parish to Bienville Parish. Here, the Jackson Independent was the sole newspaper, operated here for over a century. It stopped publication in 2019, and once the Independent stopped publishing, Jackson Parish became technically what is called a news desert.
When they mention the word news deserts, some people are kind of like, what is that? That really is a place where no information is flowing in a way that is accessible to everybody in that community. So when that happens, there's no one minding the store. So elected officials go off and do whatever they want. You don't understand what's happening with school board elections, for example, and so you may vote for people you don't know. We need information to live, literally. It's like food. We're at the Jackson Parish Library. I'm looking at copies of the Jackson Independent, which has served this community for over a century and ceased publication in 2019. What we're looking at now is one of the oldest physical copies they have here. This is from 1955. One of the things that's really interesting here is how expansive news coverage was then. These are very fragile pages, so I'm turning very slowly. Like, this is like state news, you know, state industrial expansion, but because it's a local newspaper, they focus on how much of that expansion is for Jackson Parish, and that is the function of the local news entity, is to take the big thing and see and tell your readers how that relates to them. When you think of a number of the issues of our day that have been reported on, they came through local news. Local reporters started the information about the Flint water crisis. That didn't come from national. I mean, with natural disasters, you wouldn't understand where to go. Okay. Jackson Parish is now largely served by a single online source. The only place to find the now defunct Jackson Independent is in the library morgue. Now we're traveling to Lafayette. Lafayette, some could argue, was on the verge of becoming a news desert, and we're going to Lafayette specifically to talk to people at the Current. When and why was The Current founded?
We started in 2018. It was shortly after the publication I had worked for, which was an all-weekly here called The Independent, decided to close its doors. Gannett had gone through 2 rounds of layoffs. The lone bureau guy at The Advocate leaves, and so it looked like we were headed for news desert territory, right? We felt like the voice that vacated when The Independent closed needed to be replaced, and that we were the right people to do it.
What were you hearing from the community about this shrinkage of coverage, if anything?
People missed depth. And so when we set out early, we said, we as a staff will never be big enough to blanket the town, but we can go deeper. I mean, what sets us apart is having a relationship with our community, right? Something that's really hard to replace whatever advances in technology there are is just the ability to see you in person and say, here you are, you're here for me.
Do you feel there's enough urgency in actually responding to this crisis?
No, not at all, because you can see by the paperwork that there's parishes that haven't even used the money.
Like the one we're in?
The Current has been doing deep reporting on the local opioid crisis. Elena and Denise met after Denise lost her daughter to an overdose. What is different about The Current, either the way you cover things?
We seek a lot of community input. So our coverage is really guided by what our community wants to see covered. We also are otherwise incredibly independent.
It's wonderful to have somebody to listen and actually tell you that this is important and to put this information out there for other people. Because if it has not affected your family, fentanyl, it will. If it wasn't for them, I mean, how did we get information? The information that we get is very limited.
New models are in fact popping up and taking root, and new journalists are driving it forward.
What does that look like for you?
Well, that's a very good question.
Even though this is my first professional job, I just had a feeling, I knew internally that the best work comes from reporting on the places you live, the people you see every single day, when you're not having to just kind of parachute in and say, hey, I really need someone to talk to, please be the one to help me out with this.
You have new newsrooms that are going back to the basics and providing hyper-local coverage, like Block Club Chicago.
I think not having the topical beats and being in the neighborhoods is really our bread and butter. I think that community feel of this person, you can trust this person. We want every neighborhood covered equitably.
Some are filling the void felt by marginalized communities, and others bridging the gap in rural news deserts.
Our community has been underserved, ignored, and overlooked for so long that we were craving for a place like Connect Arizona. And that very, very small WhatsApp group grew immediately, and we launched Connect Arizona.
We wanted to create a news organization that was doing local news and national news with real, strong, ambitious reporting that would be for the audiences that it was about. And that is how Capital B came to be.
Many of our own news partners here in a rural part of the country rely on our student reporters for 25% of the coverage that appears in their papers.
I don't think we're focused or should be focused on saving the old business model of journalism. I think we should be figuring out ways of sustaining enough reporters. And that's going to be in all sorts of different models.
I tell people there should be no box. We can't have a box right now. Things are changing so fast, including people. There's just many ways to get that information out. How do you keep engaging with your audiences to understand what they need, what they want, and the best ways to provide that?
From the beginning, we've never been in this work for just saving one news outlet, not one newspaper, not one type of news. A healthy ecosystem of local news includes all sorts of information sources.
As news organizations find innovative ways to connect more deeply with the communities they serve, funding sources are also evolving.
One of the things Press Forward is focused a lot on is helping outlets of any size, from 2-person outlets to 15-person outlets to 50-person outlets, understanding that you have to have diversified revenue.
Rebuild Local News was founded on the premise that one of the pieces of the puzzle has to be public policy to help strengthen communities. So it's not instead of we need better business models, we need better new editorial approaches, we need more philanthropy, but that probably won't be enough. And so we need smart public policy that is First Amendment friendly to help strengthen community news as well.
So whether it's through tax credits, a grant program, boosting the college pipeline for more students, it is an interest for governments to get involved.
It just turns out that local news is this special thing that we thought we were always going to have. It was like water. We just thought it was always there and we didn't think much about it. But it turns out when you don't have it, it's like when you don't have water. You really can't live. We really have to think about ways to invigorate local news in places where it's hard to do it. There's not as much money to make it feasible. So we're trying to find lots of ways to do that. But what we're trying to do ultimately is build awareness about how local quality news is different than national. It's different than regular social media. And it's one of the vital things that we need to live in our society.
So our local news issues are not unique to us. They are nationwide. But it is our job here to address what's happening in Kentucky. And just like Dale said on the film, we thought it was like water, that we would always have it. And now that we don't, we're looking for ways to solve this issue. So now you've seen part of the documentary. This is one of 6. I have the privilege of introducing Charles, whose voice has helped shape how our country thinks about local news, civic trust, and stories that shape us in our communities. Please join me in welcoming Charles M. Blow, national political analyst, former New York Times opinion columnist, and author. In collaboration with Press Forward and with support from the MacArthur Foundation, Charles helped produce this documentary, Reimagining Local News, that explores in depth the crisis facing local journalism and what happens when reporting disappears, and why strong local journalism still matters. A longtime op-ed columnist at the New York Times, Charles has also served as contributor to CNN, MSNBC, and anchored Prime with Charles Blow on the Black News Channel. He also publishes a column on Substack called Blow the Stack, a fierce voice in terrifying times. At a time when communities everywhere are asking what comes next for journalism and for the health of our civic life, his voice helps us see both stakes and possibilities. And for communities like ours, working every day to strengthen the future of local news, this conversation could not be more timely. Alongside his influential journalism, Charles has also written 2 very important books: the deeply personal memoir, Fire Shut Up in My Bones, later transformed into an opera, and The Devil You Know, a thought-provoking manifesto exploring the idea of a reverse Great Migration of Black Americans to the South. Welcome to the Bluegrass State, Charles Blow.
Hello.
Hello, Charles. Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
This is perfect. Thank you so much for coming to Kentucky. And also, thank you for your passion for local news, this documentary series that you have produced, because what it does for us is it solidifies what we already know. We have somebody else, a national voice, who is also speaking for us on the local news landscape. Your commitment to place-based narrative and the ownership of one's story is what we've needed to hear. So are you ready for your first question?
I'm ready for whatever you throw at me.
All right. So you're known nationally for your voice and analysis, but every national story begins somewhere local, just as Dale said in the documentary. When you think back to your early career, when did you first become aware of the power of local news? And how did that shape the journalist and thinker that you've become?
Well, thank you for that. Thank you guys for having me here. I'd never seen that picture before. I hear that there's another guy competing for our time tonight, so I'm happy you showed up here. It's actually in the documentary. I was in our local 4-H club, and the advisor took us to the local newspaper, and they let us we used to set the type. So let us set our names and type. They turned on the machine, and it cranked, and it printed our names. And I thought it was an amazing thing. And my mom had always gotten a newspaper, no matter how, we were poor, and no matter how things fluctuated, one thing that she refused to give up was the subscription to the newspaper. So she wasn't a television watcher. She watched the news, and she watched the Wheel of Fortune, which she still does. Sometimes some Jeopardy too. So I was once an answer on Jeopardy, and she flipped out. So that was her thing. And so with the local newspapers, they would occasionally, I think it was once a month, they would have a thing called a mini page. It's for kids. So my mom would be on one side of the bed reading, and I'd be on the other side doing the mini page. It had a lot of games and puzzles. So for me, news was part of life. It was something that was valued in my house, and so I became. We started a newspaper at our high school because I was just really into the idea of news, and even from the time I was in high school, I was writing letters to the editor, which they occasionally published, which is. Was a thrill. So it was always part of me and part of how I was connected to communities because I read about what was happening around me.
Nice. I think that's how a lot of journalists got started, by reading the newspaper early and it being, apparent in their homes and everywhere. So the documentary series, so in creating this, what was the central message that you hoped that viewers would walk away with, particularly about what happens to communities when local news is no longer present in everyday lives?
The biggest points were to put a face on the numbers. There were so many dire numbers about how many newspapers or television stations were closing every year or month or even week. The number of news deserts was proliferating, so you had a big number of how many counties in America. And that's important for policymaking. It is kind of a distance maker for people to connect to it. And so it was important for me to put faces and names on what was happening, the innovators, also the places and the drive into neighborhoods that had lost and to try to get a sense of what loss looked like. And then to make sure that people change their view of what local news is and provides, that it's not a dying industry that failed to adapt. Maybe you could just argue that. But it's not just any industry. It is the only industry in the Constitution. The only one. And it's because the founders realized how important it was to have someone outside the government to hold the government to account. And they realized how important freedom of speech was because they were kind of running away from a situation where they didn't feel as free. So when you lose news, you don't just lose an industry and there's something else going to pop up and replace it. What you lose is accountability, but also community and common story. And once you look at it that way, you realize that local news is a public good. It's here because it helps you to understand and connect with your neighbors over a common language and a common story. It's all the little things. It is the report on the valedictorian speech and understanding that she wants to go on to be an astronaut. It's the obituary that says, yes, you passed by Mr. Owens at the end of the block all your life, but you didn't know that he was in the war and that he had 7 grandkids. It's all that little bit, that little material that says we are one group of people, we are a community. There's a dry cleaner's closing, but there's a drugstore opening. And this is the person who owns that one, and this is the person who decided after 40 years to leave the dry cleaning business and to move away to be with near his grandkids in wherever. That material is what community is, and what the little bit of data that we have on this is that once you start to lose that, the community itself starts to fray. The more polarization creeps into it, because people now, because there's a vacuum, they turn to national news, which is much more polarizing than local news.
We talked a little bit, well, we talked a lot yesterday about how local news is that building of trust, as you had just described, so that when the big stories come in, people trust you. Can you speak to that?
There's 2 functions here. You need the local journalist to do the small story, because for 2 reasons. If I go out and do the garden club story, and yes, Mrs. Wilson has the most beautiful roses this year, and here are the pictures of those roses, and she said that she's been nurturing this particular kind for this many years, and this year she got a great blossoms because of all the weather and the things. It is training the reader, viewer, listener that this is a person who actually shows up to the thing, doesn't just comment on social media. There's proof of it because they took a picture. It's proof of it because there's a quote or multiple quotes in this article. There's proof of it because they give you background and history and analysis in the article. That's how you can tell news from basic things on social media. There is evidence that the person did reporting. And so doing the small things builds the muscle. It also builds the trust. I've seen things written by this person or videos produced by, they actually went there. They talked to the people. This is not just sniping on social media. And so then when something bigger happens, something more consequential happens, that muscle is the same muscle. Go, document, interview, ask the questions, confess what you cannot verify. So they can now, the person, because this is a person who does the same thing consistently, can trust them on the big thing, the more consequential thing, because they've exercised the same journalism that they were exercising all along on the smaller things. So if we're not training people, we won't be in position to do the big thing.
It's almost like you have a beloved, trusted member of the community who everyone depends on to do a thing every year. Maybe it's a festival, maybe it's some other kind of an event, and then that person moves away, and it just doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
It feels a lot like that.
Absolutely.
So you've said that hope is an act of resistance in some of your work, and I love that. So in my own work in academic research, I've seen how deeply narrative can shape people's sense of possibility. So how do you see local news helping communities resist despair and reclaim their voice?
Well, the first thing that it's important to remember about local news is that no one else is going to do it. Once you lose it, you may turn to a national source, you may turn to a CNN, you may turn to a New York Times, but they will never do the reporting on your community that the local newspaper was going to do. And if they ever do show up, you can feel the narration over the shoulder of the writer because they're explaining things that you in the local community don't need to be explained to because you live it. They show up and treat it kind of as a curiosity and having to explain it to people who don't live here. Local news understands that there's a local language, a local custom. They don't need to explain those things. So they can dispense with that and just get to whatever the news is of the day. So once you lose it, there is no one who's going to come in and do it. That's why communities banding together saying, you know what? I just believe this is good for us as a community to have people who professionally chronicle what is happening in our community, not as curiosity, but as, kind of the book of us. That if I look back over a year of its publication, this is literally the book of us. Nobody's going to write that book if you don't have local journalists. So it's just so important to communities. Once we stop recording us as a community, all kinds of other things creep in. The nationalization of politics creeps in. We don't know each other, so now we're sniping over things. People who don't even live here, politicians, in Washington, because we don't have the language and we don't have the knowledge and we don't have the reporting that says, but also, did you hear about our septic system is really not great right now? We need to talk. We need to go to the meeting and talk about it, listen to what they say. Oh, actually, this newspaper went to the meeting. And this is what they said they found at the meeting. And actually, this reporter actually went through all the documents relating to the building of the septic system. And this is what they found. That's what you lose. That's what you lose.
In Kentucky, as with a lot of states that have a lot of rural geography, we have a long history with national media, and we call it helicoptering in, flying out, those kinds of things. And one of the things that has really brought a lot of distrust to readers, viewers of national media is that they visit us, like what you were describing, in curiosity, but mostly in times when we're at our worst. Floods. That's been big in the last several years. A terrible tragedy, a murder. They come and see us at our worst. And what I hear you saying is that local news, they're going to see you at your worst. But they're also going to celebrate that valedictorian. They're also going to celebrate all of the roses in the garden and those kinds of things.
And some of the news entrepreneurs, even in this film, it was Block Club was in that film. That's the group in Chicago. Once they had a different business model, so they did have some revenue from subscriptions, but they also had philanthropic giving. It loosened them up. So the model with them was no longer chase news in the locations where we had the most subscribers and advertisers. The model then was looser so that they could say, we can put a reporter in every single neighborhood, even the ones where people don't have the money to subscribe. Yeah. And what I was able to talk to the people in those communities, they were like, this is the first time that people do reporting about my neighborhood when it's not about a shooting. Yeah. That builds community. Yeah. And so what that is doing is building a city that understands its neighbors better. So if you just imagine you live in a neighborhood where a city where all the money going to the local press is coming from one particular neighborhoods because they're wealthier, they have advertisers, they have subscribers. The only news that any of us in the city see from that other side is somebody got shot. So what does that do to your impression of the neighborhoods? That's dangerous over there. That's all bad news on that side of town, because that's all you ever see, because the newspaper is incentivized to only go there when the shock happens. But what Block Club was able to do is say, no, there's actually other stuff happening here. Yeah. So he was talking to that elderly lady. There was one grocery store, went out of business, but another one was coming. And she was trying to work with them to add to the grocery store some community space. Just so a room in the back, we could have some meetings every now and then. The space they were in was a library. The old one had burned. They had worked together to build a new library. And they were very proud of it. And Block Club was reporting about the library that got built. Human beings exist all across our cities, in different communities all around our cities. The only way we'll know what's happening in any kind of even, fair way so that we understand these are human beings and we have a lot in common is there are people going out and talking to people, that reporting, interviewing people, treating them like they are citizens of the community, and reporting that in a common space so you have a common language in which for communities to be built. And so when you lose that, it's a body blow to a community.
That's an excellent way of putting it. And all of those negative stories, when they're only reported on whenever, in their worst moments, there's an erosion of hope.
Yes.
Because you think that's all there is.
And a growth of suspicion.
Yes.
And kind of mistrust within community, because you only see negative things about that street, that community.
So thinking about the national narratives, the national narratives, they often overshadow what's happening locally, like you just described. So why do you think that local journalism is essential to restoring trust in democracy?
Well, first, people generally like their local reporters a lot more than they like national ones. Trust in media, and when people do the surveys, Gallup does a survey where they do trust in media. People generally are thinking national media. And they associate these very large national media brands with political ideologies because each of these national media brands has an opinion section. Right? So the Wall Street Journal's opinion section leans more right. The New York Times' opinion section leans more left. MSNBC's kind of opinion journalism towards the end of the evening leans more left. Fox used to have a kind of down the middle in the daytime, but now most of their programming leans more right. And so people associate big media brands with taking a side, and automatically the other side doesn't trust it. The more local the news gets, the less it's concerned about those things. Very often, the more local it gets, the more homogenous it gets. There's less fighting because most of the people who are reading the most local news kind of agree with each other. So you get a chance to talk about other things. You're not talking about the divisive thing. You're not talking about national politics. Nationalizing politics has been shown in studies to be really harmful to our national unity. And local journalism offers a way to consume reporting that's below that level and of interest to you about things that you will actually interact with on a daily basis. So I live in Atlanta now, I read some local newspaper is still like the biggest newspaper in Georgia is the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. But I also read the local news sites, ATL Scoop and all the things. When I tell you I can't get enough of it, I read everything to the bottom. And it's like, there's a new vintage store that just opened on so-and-so street. I'm like, who opened this vintage store? Because it's not about the politics. It's just about things I might interact with on a local basis, and it gives me some information about who's the entrepreneurs and what do they think and what made them move back to Atlanta to start this little business. And it really is something you come to trust, and also it is about community.
Yeah, hearing you talk reminds me of when I was a young journalist in my 20s. One of the things that was just every day, all day long, was your editor is pulling stories off of the AP wire, handing them to you saying, localize this, localize this, localize this. And we knew what that meant. What that meant was that you take that national view and how does it affect my everyday reader in my local community. And I am seeing less and less of that kind of thing. And, I know why. We all know why, because it's a lack of capacity. And you just don't have that reporter who can do that all day, every day. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, the importance of taking that national view and bringing it down to the everyday mom and dad that are trying to get their kids to school every day.
Right. Well, I think, we're in danger of, in some places already lost this, but other places in danger of losing it, the ability to do that thing so that people do understand. There are data centers now popping up every day. Massive investments, massive consumers of energy and water. They're being placed into communities that sometimes are news deserts. The one nearest to my mother's house is in Monroe, Louisiana. It is a news desert. That's Jackson Parish, where we just talked about.
Yeah.
There is no newspaper to say, what does this mean?
Yeah.
How many jobs are guaranteed for how long? How much water is it planning to use and how much do we have? What will be the impact on your electricity bill? What will be the benefit and how much use will the local community get from this data center, and how much will just be a national network of data centers, and they just needed to put it somewhere, so they put it in this place that's a lot of poor people and there's no newspaper to keep them accountable. That's just one example, but that is a potent one because we see it right now.
It's a very relevant example right now. We talked earlier today about how, remember back all across Kentucky whenever, all the rural communities got a landfill. And this feels a lot like that. And so, talking about the data centers, there's no oversight. There already, we know, just as journalists, we know that there are backdoor deals happening all the time. And, we want to know what those are, and local news can bring us that.
And just so we could put the buttonhole on that, the one in Jackson, the Louisiana legislature, Jackson Parish, it's in Monroe, it's in Jackson Parish without a local newspaper. The Louisiana legislature basically shifted like 75% of the cost of building this thing onto the taxpayers. There's no local newspaper to put that across the front page to say, no. You just started to pay for this and you already don't have any money.
Yeah, exactly. And we have elected officials who don't understand it, who are agreeing to things that they don't know what they're agreeing to. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on with local news. So bringing that down another layer, how do you think or what role can local reporters and journalists play in bridging these divides between people that are brought to us from the national scene, the polarization, and then, going further than that, humanizing these really complex issues?
Well, I don't think that it is the job of the journalists to even worry about polarization. It is the job of the journalists to be fair and report the news that is important to that particular readership. It just so happens that the local journalist is reporting on a set of issues that are not as polarizing. Yeah. So just by doing the job of relating bigger stories and explaining to your readers how they affect you, but also finding the local news that's bubbling up. Mm-hmm. Something is happening here. 5 of the 6 school buses, the brakes weren't good. Whatever it is, that is the job of the local journalist, and it just so happens that it is not as polarizing as national political news. Yeah. So just doing the work helps for people to see that there is a whole ecosystem of reporting. It's not just this fighting and bickering. There are multiple levels of reporting that are important to me that I find interesting, all the way down to the Garden Club and the Roses. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned this, you touched on it slightly when you were talking about the Block Club in Chicago, how some of those blocks were like, nobody's ever reported on us before. And I'm wondering, in your work with local news, have you seen place-based local news shift perception in local communities?
I don't have data. So, because some of these, almost every one of the news entrepreneurial efforts sprang up in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So they're really young, the ones that we focused on. So we don't have a lot of data about how the community has been changed by them. So it's all anecdotal. So people that we were able to interview in the course of doing their documentary.
So I think we've already talked about this a little bit, but I can't hear it enough, and I think that the people in this room can't hear it enough. So last week I reposted a quote of yours on LinkedIn. And it says, "The texture of community is what's here, what's coming, what are we celebrating, what threatens us, and no national newspaper will report that." Take us a little bit deeper into your conviction on how you feel that way.
Well, it's not even just a feeling. I worked at one of the biggest newspapers in the country for 30 years. They don't have anybody to do that. Yeah. They have bureaus in some southern cities, not all. Some operate, in a bureau like Atlanta that covers several states. The only thing you can do at that scale with 5 reporters for a 3-state coverage is just cover the biggest things you see or the oddest things you see. Yeah.
We've experienced some of that here in Kentucky. The New York Times has not always been unkind to us, but they have been unkind to us, as I think most rural communities. So, yeah, I get exactly what you're saying. So, yeah, the oddest things. So, shifting gears a little bit, what advice?
And you don't even know that your thing is odd until the Times tells you,
oh, that's
this
true.
is an odd thing.
And you're like, you don't.
We've been doing that for 50 years. How's this odd? Like,
yeah. Yeah, we talk about that frame, that frame of perception, and it's like, if it fits inside the frame, nobody cares about it. If it's outside the frame, then, suddenly people want to report on it and do those things. So, yeah. So, I've been doing this for a long time, you've been doing it for a long time. We've got people coming up behind us. And what advice would you give to young people who are either in an internship with us that we're funding or one of their Report for America fellowships who want to tell authentic stories about their communities? What advice would you give them?
Which I would just say that the mode of communication will always be in flux and they'll change. The fundamentals of journalism don't change. Go there, document it, photograph or otherwise, record it, video it, interview people, interview multiple people if you can. If there is any contention about it, try your best to get both sides of that contention. If there are documents that are available, request them, review them, analyze what they say, and publish that. That's basic reporting since the time that, Frederick Douglass had a newspaper. There's no change. I'm writing a book now. It's basically, most of it is set in the late 1800s. It's the same thing. There is no difference. One of my favorite stories I just came across was a guy in a state legislature, and he had to sit in the gallery, so he couldn't go down and talk to anybody. So he said, the headline was, "Delegates as viewed from the back." And it's like a description of each delegate from their back, But he was there. It established them as being in the room, and what he saw in the room, that is also reporting. So it just doesn't change. And so if you're interested, it is a documenting, it is what they always say is, you're writing the first draft of history. So that someone like me can come back in 100 years and look at your first draft and line it up with documents, official documents, and say, okay, this is what was happening at the time. What we end up losing when we stop having journalism at all levels of our society, people stop writing the first draft of history.
That's a really good way to look at it. I remember early in my career, there was a photographer, he recently passed away, but I remember he told me that, you as a young journalist, you get wrapped up in all of these things and all of these details. And, his question to me was, ask yourself, Melissa, is this going to matter 100 years from now? Because when people look at us 100 years from now, what are they going to see? Make sure it's accurate, make sure it's right. So yeah, Charles just gave all of you guys Journalism 101. That was it right there. So yeah, thank you for that. Again, talking about the young journalists who are coming up behind us, when I remember my first story that I wrote in the newspaper, it's like, and it got printed. I think you talked about that too. It's like you see it and it's in print. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's so exciting. Well, you can see your name everywhere now, on, Substack, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on all of the socials. You've spoken really powerfully about who holds the pen and the power of authorship. So what do you see in the future of this ownership of narrative in the digital age?
Well, first of all, there is some confusion. People are gravitating to people who basically read headlines. Listen, I like this guy, Parnas, I think is his
Aaron
name.
Parnas, yeah.
Yes. But he's basically reading the headlines and reporting of other people.
Yes.
Someone has to do that first reporting for somebody else to read it. Yeah. So I'm just really, I find it just really important to keep saying we need the actual reporters. They're not glamorous. I've been in newsrooms. I was like, there's some ogres in this newsroom. They don't move. They just sitting in there, and they on the phone. I need a quote,
Yeah.
But you need those people because that's how you get the info.
Yeah.
There's a grouchy person in the back of a meeting and they're saying, I'm not leaving till I get a quote, It's not the glamour of social media where you can just sit in perfect lighting and read a headline and you look great and you speak well. a lot of reporters, that is not what the business they were in. They were literally trying to record as much as they could record of what had happened that day, that week, that month, in that place. You need people who are mission-driven, they're not glamorous, they are doing a job that must be done for your community to be whole.
You're absolutely right. It is not pretty work. It's not. And, you know, when you see somebody who is on and, you know, they're on the beautiful lights and those kinds of things, you know, unless they came home, took a shower, and then did all that, you know, they didn't really do the hard work. I go back to, I met my husband. We were both journalists, and one of our dates was in a flood where, you know, we were knee-deep in the muck.
Best
walking
dates ever.
around.
Best dates ever.
I'm telling you. And, you know, it's not glamorous work, and it's not pretty. And, you know, you want to cry, you want to scream, you want to give up. And I love what you're telling these young people is that the foundational pieces are always the same, no matter what, whether it's right now or 100 years from now.
Right.
You know, the Society of Professional Journalists, Code of Ethics, you know, who are you quoting and why?
Yes.
So, yeah. So who is doing more to shape what news gets covered? The government or the people right now? And who should it be?
Wait, what's the question?
The question is, who right now, I know I shifted really quickly, I'm so sorry. I wanted to get this question in. So who right now is doing more to shape what news gets covered? Is it the government or the people?
I mean, I don't think government is shaping what news gets covered. The government is making a lot of news, and covering it requires so many resources that it can take resources from covering other things. I think that is true. I do believe that because newspapers and television stations and radio stations are trying to survive, they are responding even more now more than ever to viewer reader appetites, because also now you have metrics. When we were younger in the news business, we had no idea who was reading, you know, the classical musical review or the story about Kosovo, or who was reading, you know, the opinion column. There was no way to know. You bought the whole newspaper. So we couldn't disaggregate it. Now we know what stories you click on, how long you click on it, how long it's read, everything. So they know exactly what people will read, what they'll stay on, what they'll read to the bottom. That means that they are trying, you know, they want to still produce a whole product, but the business person in them says, let's give them a little bit more of this thing that they keep clicking on and reading to the bottom. So you see on the New York Times site, there's a lot of recipes, right? Because they work. People clip them, they save them, they come back to them, they share them with the neighbor. This is great. You should make this. Games. People spend a lot of time on games. So they know what works. And some of those things that produce the money pay for some of the things that don't produce as much money, but you still believe are important things to document, to write the first draft of the history.
Yeah. I guess I should have asked that question in a different way, and I love your answer. In thinking about, like, good journalism doesn't tell us what to think, but tells us what to think about. And I think that right now we have, you know, Aaron Parnas, we have, you know, some of the other social media influencers, creators that are telling us to think about one thing, while national news trying to cover government the best that they can are telling us to think about these other important issues. And it feels like, you know, it's like you don't know where to look. You don't know what to care about.
Well, there's also a reader appetite issue we have in America. It has been fed by social media, but it shows up in regular media, which is people are addicted to outrage. And the newspapers see this. Television stations see this. So they lean more into opinion. When I started an opinion, it was probably a third the size of it is now. It was a moneymaker because people wanted more ammunition than information. They wanted to win the fight with their friends at work, over the backyard fence. They wanted to win the argument. And opinion, to some degree, chewed your food for you. It packaged a great argument, written well expressed, but it was an argument that you could then go back and unload on the person you disagreed with. And you didn't have to read all the reporting, and you didn't have to read the reports, and none of it. They'd done the work for you. They had packaged, they had given you a perspective, packaged it as an argument, and written it short. Columns are only 800 words, 850. It's short, very packed, powerful. And so people got to the point where they wanted more and more and more of that. Still do. And they want it to such a degree and read so much of it that they then color the direct news where people are not trying to do that.
Yeah.
The whole news section of the New York Times, they're not even involved with the opinion section. There's no communication, there's nothing. They're just trying to tell it as straight as possible. But because the biggest names are the opinion names, people associate it with left. The other problem with that is that when you're a local newspaper, and it is still a local newspaper, if you exist in New York City, you're also going to cover gay marriages and all the things. So if the lifestyle sections start to feel left, it's just, they're not left, they're place. So when I go back to my hometown in Louisiana, the biggest local newspaper, the Shreveport Times, they have a religion page. That's important because that's place. That doesn't mean they're leaning right. It's just that churches are big part of the community in Shreveport, in North Louisiana. That's just place. That's not a leaning. But all that gets confused. And so then people just say, they're just, pitching an agenda that's just that they're reflecting the community that they're in. That's what we want local newspapers to do. We want local media to do. Reflect the community. What's important in your community? If church is important in your community, have a religion page.
That is such a good point. The reflectiveness of the community is what local journalism is. As we continue with this work in Kentucky of making our local news stronger and more sustainable over time, if you could leave this audience, potential funders, journalists, civic leaders, with one call to action tonight, something that they could do to help local news, what would that be?
Change your thinking. Throw out the idea that it's a business. Think of it as a public utility. And once you think of it as a public utility, you don't want it to leave no more than you want the local power plant to leave or the local water filtration facility to leave, because you need that stuff to live. You need this to live too. Does the local electric company need to make some money? Yes. But you need it to make when you come in to flip the light and it comes on. You need it too. So once you change your perspective, you realize that it is part of the community's job to make sure that the public utility remains so that both people are fed. The community is fed, and this thing makes enough money that it survives, and it pays enough electricians to make sure that the wires are still running.
We are kind of like electricians, aren't we?
And fixing people and muckrakers and
Yeah,
all the
whatever.
things.
Yeah, plumbers, whatever, yeah. So, as we want to be able to stay in touch with all of you throughout this journey with us, because we believe that the community is going to be part of this rebuilding, this restructuring, this new sustainability. And the Knight Foundation grant that we received, it includes a $450,000 match grant. So for every dollar that is donated to us for this cause, we get to pull down $1 of that $450,000. And so when you think about what you're giving to, and when you think about the things that you care about, we hope that you will come along this journey with us and that we can rebuild something that feels a lot like when you turn on the faucet. It's always going to be there. That water is always going to be there. So, Charles, I cannot thank you enough for coming to Kentucky and for really helping us to feel validated in the work that we're doing. And I truly mean that, because we can say this and we can scream it to the top of our lungs, but now we have an advocate in you that's saying this on the national stage. So, thank you very much.